But in this situation, I just don't. I agree with Ross. I don't think he's right.
Gerber and Gary Black went on TV to campaign against Elon Musk. They called out Elon and they think Elon is wrong. Ross also really surprised me with one of his takes. And now let's dive in.
Base model is now just under $47,000, and that is now cheaper than the average price of all vehicles on the road today, any kind of engine, by about $700. Now, Musk has said he is not trying to start a price war in the EV space, but the cost cuts certainly are going to put a strain on the EV competitors, who continue to lose money on most of their cars.
Make no mistake, this is a full-fledged war and Tesla is winning. But even winners experience pain in the short term, but not in the long term.
But why are some Tesla shareholders not that happy about this move? Let's talk about it. Gerber Kawasaki president and CEO Ross Gerber and the future fund managing partner Gary Black, both of them own a bunch of Tesla. You're very pro-Tesla. You love Tesla. You don't like this move, Ross, I would imagine, because I think, understanding your tweets, you basically want them to take this money and put it into advertising to sell more cars.
Correct. I mean, every company in America advertises their product and has to educate the public on what their product is. And an advanced technology vehicle like an EV with full self-driving is definitely something the average American really has no idea about. And so I find losing, $7, $8, $9 billion of profit for the year in our estimates over a resistance to spend maybe $100 million on advertising to just be sort of like not the right way to sell cars.
Ross Gerber believes that spending just $100 million will generate a return on investment of 70 times. I generated millions of dollars from advertising. That sounds like a very high and unlikely return on investment. If you have a widely successful viral ad campaign, I'm certainly not saying it's not impossible, but how likely is it? I would say that chances are quite low. So I find this particular take from Ross quite surprising. We know that Elon believes that Tesla at some point will advertise, but how big will the return on investment be? We won't really know until we actually try. We can speculate a lot right now. And what I know for sure from my experience running ads, the first time you run the ad, the return is much higher, and with time generally advertising becomes less and less and less effective. And by far the most important thing when it comes to running ads is how good is your product. If you have a tremendously good product, which Tesla does, and then if it comes at a price that is phenomenal, it amplifies the ads by a lot. So advertising does make sense if the prices of the vehicles are not going to be lowered anymore. But if we think that eventually the vehicles will sell at a lower price, then I would prefer to lower the prices now, make the advertising a lot more effective and strangle the competition in the meantime, because they won't be able to compete on pricing with Tesla.
Yeah, Gary, you tweeted out, Tesla can't complain about people not understanding the implications of FSD, full self-driving, if Tesla does not communicate the benefits. And I think that's a great point. I mean, full self-driving is like something out of the Jetsons. You're going to have to really train people on how to think about this.
I do like that smile on Gary's face, but overall, when Elon says people don't get FSD, I think he is talking about investors, not so much about consumers. I don't think there's that much of a point for Gary to call out Elon on this one. And if you have a Tesla and you witness the progress that full self-driving has made from a year ago to now, you are stunned how fast they are progressing. Unless you were extremely convinced that full self-driving was going to be solved last year, then of course you are really upset. But I think it is going to happen sometime before the end of 2030. Even if you do not assume exponential improvements in the system, it is quite obvious if you actually use the system yourself regularly and you used it a year ago and then a year before then, that the progress is quite fast. It is much more difficult to gauge the progress just by looking at the videos online, because the videos online just usually take the best drive or the highlights, and that makes it really difficult to compare how good really was it let's say 2 years ago or a year ago compared to now. But if you drive it yourself and you go through the same spots in the city, yeah, it's pretty impressive how much better it has gotten. For example, before, there's no way I would want to drive on FSD or on autopilot. Over here where I live, I don't know what it is. It just didn't work at all. I watched videos online and it seemed like it worked well for many people, but for me, not even the autopilot was pretty bad. Now, as long as I'm not in extreme rush, I'm always driving on full self driving or on autopilot. Unless I have multiple other people in the car, then I might just drive myself, or I'll just take over before the car disengages if I'm going through a tougher spot in the city. But if I'm just driving by myself, I don't mind the disengagements. So I just turn it on. It just makes my drive actually better. As an investor, this makes me bullish.
I just think the whole pricing, price cuts that they've put in place don't make a lot of sense. As Ross points out, every time they cut prices on, say, Model Y by $1,000, it's costing them $500 million. And really what they need to do to continue to drive EV adoption is to teach people why an EV is better. Communicate, educate. So it's a lower operating cost. It's much easier to just plug it in your garage or in a charger rather than go to a filthy, dirty gas station. The technology is better, the autonomy is better, the resale value is better, and you're doing something for the environment. So to Ross's point, rather than spend, again, take the price from $46.9 to $45.9. Is that really going to drive affordability? That's worth $500 million. I'd rather take $50 million and educate the American public on why EVs are better than, conventional engines.
The education is also happening through the word of mouth, and that is also accelerating as more and more Teslas are out there. And also, some of these other legacy automakers are actually advertising their EVs, educating the public why EVs are better. It's just, do we want to accelerate that education through advertising?
Is there any sign of demand weakening, Ross, or you think this is Musk just trying to put sort of, give a kick to his competitors, or maybe he's worried about the impact of higher interest rates, cutting that monthly payment?
Well, I mean, he said it in the call that he's lowering rates based off the supply and demand of the vehicle. And so obviously demand is weakening because he keeps lowering prices to stoke demand and not using other tools to stoke demand. But what I'm most concerned about is he started a process for the consumer where they have the incentive not to buy the car this week because it's going to be cheaper next week. And so if you're constantly lowering the price of a vehicle, there's no incentive for somebody to go out and buy a car today when it's going to be cheaper in 3 weeks.
It's like the flat panel TV effect, Gary. But I mean,
right.
Elon Musk is a super smart dude. He must have a plan.
Elon Musk does have a plan. And even if you think that the prices are going to go down and you are going to buy a new vehicle, you can only wait for so long. Maybe you can wait for 1 month, 2 months, maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year. At some point, you will say, I had enough. I am buying a Tesla now. If you look at the inventory in the US for the Model Y, clearly it is going down. And what happens once it reaches zero? The backlog builds up. And what happens then? Tesla increases prices. So just looking at the inventory, I don't think anyone is really waiting for more price cuts for the Model Y specifically, but for the Model 3, yeah, maybe. And I think the price cuts are very likely for the Model 3 in the US. He's
a great engineer. He's a good CEO. He's created a lot of wealth for people. But in this situation, I agree with Ross. I don't think he's right. What Tesla has done is basically increasing their production by 50% year over year. But the underlying demand is only growing at 35. And so as Ross says, the only way to deal with that, if you're not going to advertise, is to cut price. And so this is the third or fourth price decline on Model Y this year. You are going to teach people, let's just wait for another price decline before we buy it. And that's the challenge.
I have a question, and this is a genuine question. Have you heard or seen anyone who said, you know what? This product is actually a really good product. I see this other inferior product that is more expensive, and because I think this good product is going to go down in price, I will actually buy this more expensive inferior product. Have you ever heard anyone say that or actually follow through with that? I personally have not. please leave a comment down below if you are actually aware of someone from your personal experience doing something this stupid. It must have happened at least once, but I would be surprised, extremely shocked, stunned if this is a regular occurrence.
And I wonder how bad could it be for the stock, Ross? I mean, at what point does the stock stop going down?
Well, the stock's down 11% since they just cut price last week. Earnings since last week are down about 11%. Every time they cut price, surprisingly, the analysts are not adding to their volume forecast. They're basically leaving the volume forecast alone, and they're just letting price drop to the bottom line. And that's why estimates keep getting cut, and that's why the stock price keeps going down.
While sometimes in the short run, analysts are right about Tesla's stock. In the long run, especially when it comes to deliveries and volumes forecast, almost every single one of them got the numbers really wrong. If you trade Tesla stock, of course, you should be looking at these numbers very carefully and you should be evaluating everything short term. But if you are a long-term investor and you're looking out 5 years or 10 years, almost all of these analysts have been terribly wrong. Look at Morgan Stanley here, for example. Back in 2016, they predicted that Tesla would only sell 246,000 vehicles in 2020. So this is not even a super long-term prediction. And Tesla delivered about twice as many vehicles in 2020. And here's one more thing to really consider and think about. When you cut prices, of course, some people will hesitate to buy. But if later, let's say, Tesla decides to advertise, and if it works so well that Tesla has to increase the prices, what does that do? It creates an urgency to order, therefore possibly creating a rush of orders that would make Tesla increase prices again. So I don't have a problem with Tesla experimenting with pricing and trying to figure out exactly where should pricing be at. In the long term, if, let's say, advertising works so well, if Tesla does start advertising that there's so much more demand, then okay, the prices will come back up and demand will be extremely high, and then long-term earnings will be unaffected. Although a few years in the meantime, or a few months or a few quarters in the meantime, these may be affected. And if you are a short-term investor, of course, you will be upset. But as a long-term investor, I welcome this because if you experiment, you will find new ways of doing business. I don't think there is a problem with Tesla experimenting with price cuts, and then if they do need to advertise later on, it's no problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, if you take away the name and you say it's a stock, stocks go up based off earnings. And if they keep lowering prices and they're not defending margin, they're lowering earnings. So essentially what they're doing is they're taking shareholder value and giving it away to the new buyers of Teslas who are getting the deal of a lifetime because they refuse to create demand through traditional levers. Remember, 90% of Americans don't buy an EV, and yet now it's the average price of a car, and yet the value proposition on an operational basis is massive. I mean, you don't pay for gas, you don't pay for repairs. I mean, the cars work wonderful, and we're not even talking about the technology and that it's great for the environment. So the fact that they haven't sold out of every car is crazy when gas costs $120 to fill up your gas tank.
Ross is in LA, so that's why gas is so expensive over there.
I will say this, the entire auto industry, as a car guy, the entire auto industry is just dumb in how they market. Have you noticed every EV ad is like 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds? You think a lot of people want that? That's like race car speed. It's dangerous. They got to figure out the marketing across the board for all these cars, not just Tesla. I mean, do we want 8,000-pound trucks that go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds? That's not good for tires either. Tires are made out of what? Petroleum.
Well, that's quite a way to turn a positive selling point into a negative. I don't think I have ever met anyone who said, you know what, I wish that my car was a whole lot slower. You know that when they make these vehicles, they have multiple options and you can choose a slower trim if you like to. As someone who made money from advertising, I'm not opposed to advertising, but I do like the idea of strangling the competitors a little bit more than advertising and increasing our profits, but then also increasing our competitors' profits. And then once we reach a price point where we don't want to go any lower, then I would say advertise, assuming that the vehicles do not sell themselves at that point. And this is a video that explains why Tesla board members are now buying more Tesla stock. My name is Matt Posius. Like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.